Toph Beifong. I mean, do I need to say more? Easily the best character in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Here's the commented step-by-step process of painting her in Photoshop. Well, hello there, I'm Detroit. I'd like to start this video by saying that this idea was partially inspired by Rem Jolia, I don't know if I'm saying your name right, sorry, who said I should go back to my first fandom and make a drawing from that. That's Avatar: The Last Airbender, of course. If you want to see me draw something in particular, leave a suggestion in the comments, and subscribe, because honestly, why not? Back to Toph Beifong, I really like her. If you don't agree that she's the best character, well, you're wrong, but I'll accept it. We're not here to debate anyway, you're here to see me draw her. Straight away, as I'm sketching her, you can maybe recognize that this scene comes from the first episode we meet Toph. She's the champion of the underground earthbending battles, and she's about to meet Aang and company. However, drawing a screen capture of the series is a bit boring and a bit cheap, so I added a twist. Here's the reference picture I'm looking at. It's straight on, a bit zoomed in, overall boring. What I want to do is a view from above to emphasize Toph's control over the situation and how badass she is. What that means is a lot of foreshortening and including things that weren't in the screen capture, like her feet and the arena. The way I want to draw that picture, I'm not being precious with my sketch at all. I mean, in a way, that's the point of a sketch. I'm also drawing in different layers the background sketch and the character sketch. The goal with this step of the drawing process is to get the angles right, the proportions matching with the foreshortening, and work on the composition for the background. If you're wondering, the sketching phase took me around 20 minutes. Now that the early sketch is fine, I'm moving on to inking. 12 minutes of inking that you're seeing in just a few seconds because I straight up deleted it because I didn't like the inking at all. I talked about it in last week's digital drawing video. I want to make a few changes in my art style and drawing process, and inking was one of them. I always ink the same way, and today it's going to change. So instead of lowering the opacity of the sketch and using a thin black brush to ink, I'm duplicating the sketch layer and drawing directly on it. The way I want to approach that is to refine the sketch. I'm using a black brush but way larger than my usual inking size. By switching constantly between the eraser and the brush, I'm erasing the lines from the sketch that I won't keep and going over the ones I do keep. This is the reason I duplicated the sketch before, just so if I need the construction lines, I still have them somewhere. When I'm done with the heavy sketch, as I'm calling it, the entire drawing is just made of simple shapes and really thick lines. This is in preparation of phase 3, if I know how to count right. Now I'm using the eraser, zooming in and making all the lines thin. You can see it this way. Instead of a constructive process of adding lines in the inking, I'm using a destructive process and removing the excess ink. This allows me to control the thickness of the lines and make them more interesting. My inking always tends to be of the same weight everywhere, but this way I can vary the weight more easily. For example, at the intersection of two lines, it will make a denser area of ink. And when the lines disappears, in folds for example, I can make it so thin that it disappears naturally. It really goes to show that you can take the drawing process in any way you want as long as you're happy with it. There's no rule to follow precisely, just have fun. This step took around an hour to complete, which is only a slightly bit longer than I would expect my usual inking to take. After a short break away from my graphics tablet, I'm going back in and noticing the mistakes I made. I want the pose to be a bit more dynamic, so I'm moving the shoulders around. I'm also fixing the sleeve folds a little bit more and stuff like that. As you will see, I also spend a lot of time fixing the backhand. Hands are really hard to draw, but this is fine. This is good training. Since my reference is from another angle, this makes me work on hands more than just replicating what I see. Each finger hides a bit of the finger below, but because this is the backhand, there is no use in being too precise with it. As long as it looks good from afar, it's enough. One thing you'll never hear enough about drawing is do not overwork it. The focus of the scene isn't on this hand in particular, so as long as it's convincing, it's enough. For the same reason, I'm reworking the feet a little bit. I'm drawing the tippy toes inside the foot shapes. I never draw feet when I don't have to because they're almost as hard to draw as hands. Another reason why I changed the angle compared to the reference picture, to force myself to draw them. Another thing I work on and that I talked about in last week's video is hair. I want to be able to draw cute anime girl hair. Spoiler alert, I'm not quite there yet, but at least I learned a lot while drawing Toph. The way to make nice hair shapes that seem to work for me is to first make large shapes with the flow of the hair. As you can see for Toph, there's 3 crescent shapes in front of her face. Going in, I'm adding lines with the same flow as the rest of the shape and cutting the end slightly. That gives more dynamics to it while keeping the overall flow. Right about now, I'm happy with the character inking. I'll ink the background quickly, either by using black ink on the new layer or by changing the opacity of the grid I drew for the arena floor, and that is already pretty nice. Honestly, I'm not thinking about it too much. It's just the background, you won't look at it too much, it just serves to emphasize the main focus of the drawing, Toph herself. But the real interesting part starts now. It's of course the coloring/rendering. What you should start the coloring with is always the background, for the flats at least. I won't render it until later, but it is important to have an idea of the value of the background. All the colors need to work together, so by coloring the background first, I know how dark or light I should make the rest of the scene. I can then color the character properly, starting with separating the different areas by color. The hair is one layer, the skin another, the green cloth, and so on. Because this is a cartoon character, it's pretty easy, there's not a lot of diversity in the colors. Clipping masks are a digital artist's best friend, so once I have defined all the areas, I don't risk ruining it. I can draw away and the brush will only affect the proper area. I should say, what color I choose doesn't matter that much at this point, because I can always tweak it slightly later using curves and different tools. Think of the big picture. Just like the inking and stuff earlier, it doesn't have to be perfect straight away. Start big and then refine later. The only bad side is that while you, the viewer, is watching me draw, it takes a while before the drawing starts to look good. Once the flats are good enough, it's time to render a bit. The way I'm doing it is by picking a soft round brush, the most basic Photoshop has. I'm lowering the opacity at around 65% and I'll start with a shade darker than the flats color. A tip I like to give a lot is to change the tone a little bit with the value. Use a colder color for cloth when you're picking a darker color. For example, with green, go slightly towards blue. For skin, it should be warmer, i.e. more red. So at first I'm adding the darker tone generously on a clipping layer. After that I'm picking a shade even darker and applying it more sparingly on yet another layer. The third clipping layer after that is lighter than the base color, and it's used to make highlights and enhance the contrast. These 3 layers I'm making for each separate area I define with my flats. You can see that with the color palette on the screen, where I add all the shades I use for each tone. I am also mixing in a saturation and value layer to tweak the colors and make them look better together. This is why I added all the tones to the color palette. Because the effect layer will change them, it's hard to find the exact same color as before once it's been tweaked. Now Toph looks already more 3D than in the original 2D reference. We're in the right direction. It's time to give her some eyes. Even if she is blind, it doesn't mean she shouldn't have eyes, right? For now, all the colors are laid in and the rendering is pretty good. I want to work on the background a bit more before I go too far. It has to go well with the character. I can't have a flat background and a 3D character, it would contrast too much. This is like a balancing thing. It's better to alternate between the two a bit before you go too far on one side to be able to catch up on the other side. I hope it makes sense. I'm adding a bunch of things like shadows, background characters watching Toph fight, and also some bits of rock everywhere. Let's not forget that this is an earthbending fighting match, so there's bound to be rubble and remnants of earthbending. I'm also designing on an interesting direction for the artwork. Remember the way Toph sees while earthbending? She sees the vibration on the ground like the badger moles taught her, and it looks like a shockwave propagating on the earth. So let's draw that, shall we? This will make for an interesting drawing, I think. One of the last things I want to address for this drawing process is the line art again. Now, the way it is, it's black, of course. What I like to do to change that is to paint over it with the same color as the area it surrounds, but darker, like way darker. I do that over my inking, but I also keep a layer of black inking that I play around with, changing the opacity and the layer style until the combination of all of that looks good. And now I think I'm done, so I can sign the drawing. Oh wait, no, I completely forgot to add shadows to the ground under the rocks. Let's do that. While I'm at it, I am also noticing that I don't really like all the colors together. If you didn't notice, I rarely use green in my digital paintings. I don't particularly like the color green and I find it hard to work with. I'm more of a blue and orange kind of guy, and I also really love purples. Green and yellow, not so much. Let's make it better with a bit of curve action and then we can call it a day. I learned a lot while drawing this. From what I said last week, that I wanted to learn how to render characters in Photoshop, I did take a step in the right direction, I think. Besides, this was a good practice piece because it has everything. Things that are hard to draw like hands and feet, things that are hard to render like hair and eyes. It has a background, it has foreshortening, etc, etc. It's complicated and hard work, but it's training in all sorts of different areas, which is good. If you like the drawing, there's a button for that in the shape of a thumbs up that you can click. You can also leave a comment to tell me what you want to see me draw, or what you learned or didn't learn watching this. I'm also really open to feedback and tips of your own, of course. Subscribe if you want to tag along on this arts journey, and come say hi on Twitter or Instagram, where all my drawings are visible, even the ones that don't make it to video format. I'm Detroit, and I sincerely hope you had a good time. Bye!